Elizabeth Bacwayo, and a presentation is titled Privatization of Higher Education in Uganda, Assessing the State of Research and Productivity. I'll quickly go through the profile of Professor Kukunda. Elizabeth Bacwayo is an Associate Professor of Governance and Development and a researcher with experience in development policy at the Faculty of Social Science at the University of Uganda Christian University. She holds a PhD in Development Studies from Massey University in New Zealand. She has more than 20 years of teaching and research experience. She received numerous training in multi-method research. Also received various grants, honors, and awards, including one from Makerere University Research and Innovation Funding, which she received in 2020. She also received an award from the Inter-University Council of East Africa Staff Mobility Fellowship in 2019, and she also received a Fulbright Scholarship Award in 2014 and 2015, among just to name a few. Professor Bacwayo is currently a dean at the School of Research and Postgraduate Studies at Uganda Christian University. And after your presentation, Prof, we'll also have our discussant here, Dr. Edward Mboyonga, who's a postdoc fellow at the University of the Free State in our department. And just to remind you a little bit, Prof, our BBT will last approximately an hour. We're going to give you an opportunity to do your presentation for 30 minutes, and after that, we'll give our discussant, Dr. Edward, to give some reflection on your presentation, which will last for 10 minutes to 15 minutes, and thereafter, we'll also give you an opportunity to reflect and respond or comment on what he's actually going to present about. Then thereafter, we'll give people, the audience and everyone who joined online an opportunity to give their comments and ask any questions. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much, for that introduction, for your kind introduction. And I'd like to thank you and your colleagues for the opportunity for me to share with you about my ideas and my research. I hope I'm clear. It is raining over here, so I don't know whether the internet is behaving. Please give me an indication whether I'm clear or whether I may need to switch off my my video for clarity.
It's good.
It's good.
We can hear you here.
Okay, great. I have not used I have not used this for sharing, so I hope that I'll be able to share my my presentation. First time I'm going to try and use this. I've only used Zoom for this, so you'll excuse me. Okay, I hope you can see my slide.
Yes, you can see it. You can see it.
Thank you. So once again, I really want to thank you for the opportunity. Okay, I thought I had somebody say hello. For me to present to your group, thank you especially.
Sorry, Prof, just to interrupt a little, can you please make a slideshow, the presentation on slideshow?
It is actually in slideshow. From my end, it is slideshow.
Oh.
So I don't know why. I'll try again.
Yeah. Okay, please try again.
Is that okay?
Yes,
is that slideshow now?
No.
Not yet.
Oh, from my end, it is slideshow. Oh.
Okay, Prof, you can proceed. You can proceed.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I don't know why it is not why it's not showing a slideshow. From my end, it is slideshow. Okay, so I am going to be talking to us, sharing with us about privatization of higher education in Uganda and looking at the state of research productivity. Incidentally, I'm no longer Dean of the School of Research and Postgraduate Studies. I thought I better clear that up. I'm now Director of Postgraduate Directorate, which happened in 2022. This is the outline of my presentation. I'll look at introduction, objectives, methodology, results, and discuss the findings and conclusion. As way of introduction, there's been a demand for higher education, not only in Uganda, but also worldwide. And the private sector, as far as higher education is concerned, is one of the fastest growing subsector. Currently, we have 44 private universities in Uganda, compared to 13 public universities. Of the 44, only 12 are chartered. What we mean by chartered are those universities that the accreditation body, the National Council for Higher Education, has given a full, like they are saying, you have all the benchmarks that are needed, they are in place, and so you can go ahead. With the others that are not chartered, they are usually they still have some things. They can easily be told you need to stop now, but for the chartered ones, they give them specific number of years where they can continue operating. And the expectation is that universities, not just in Uganda, but worldwide, are centers for research, for scholarship, and for knowledge generation. And lecturers are known as researchers, and they are expected to continually be creating new knowledge. And the framework for my presentation and my paper is the public sector reforms, and from the view of development studies. As I was kindly introduced, my background is development studies, and so I'm looking at higher education from the perspective of development and the issue of public sector reforms. Now, for a long time, in sub-Saharan Africa, especially, the delivery of public services was the job of government, the job of the public sector, and higher education was not was also part of what was expected to be provided by the government. But in the 1980s, as most of us who have done development studies know, in the 80s and 90s, as countries started to struggle with balancing their budgets, and as World Bank and IMF became increasingly influential in these countries, this whole idea of the government being the provider of services was changed. That people were now arguing, economists were arguing against the provision of public services by the government. And in particular for Uganda, there were structural adjustment policies that were put in place with the public sector withdrawing from provision of many of the services, and with the private sector becoming the major provider of many services, things like banks, things like education. Even in primary education, in a long time, it used to be government. For a long time, higher education was government, but all this, the public was withdrawing. Also because there was this argument that government is inefficient, governments are slow, and some of them are corrupt. And so the reforms that started meant that there was reduced government expenditure, and there was argument that university education, especially because for a long time it was nobody would pay for university education. Actually, up to now, people who pay for university education do it reluctantly. They complain because they think it should be provided by government. And so there was this argument that it's not a worthwhile public investment. And when people go to university, it doesn't produce public benefits. And so it's an individual who benefits. And the university that we had at that time, we had only one university, Makerere University. It started admitting fee-paying students. But as I said, I'm looking at this from the perspective of development, and my argument is that higher education plays a very important role for sustainable development. And it doesn't have only individual benefits. It benefits both the public, it also has social benefits. And if it's not given sufficient support, it can lead to poor quality graduates, and this can be costly, not only to the individuals that get poor quality, but also to the economy. And there is sufficient evidence to show that people who get higher education, who go to school in universities, their capacity to even get new knowledge, to create new knowledge, to use technology increases compared to somebody who maybe went to primary school. But it also gives individuals the capacity to easily change jobs, and then they don't have to rely so much on government. But also we are in an era where—
Sorry, Prof. Sorry, the slide, we don't see the slide. Yeah, but they're okay, they're moving now.
Oh, okay. I think I'm just going to stop showing it. Can you see it now? Hello?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, we can see now.
We can see now. We can follow the presentation now.
You can see the slide?
We can see the slides. Yes, yes.
Oh, that's interesting.
You are on slide number 7.
Yes, and
yes.
okay. I will try and again put it in slideshow. Is that working? Can you see it?
It's not on slideshow yet, but you can continue. We can follow the slides now.
Okay, sorry. I don't know why it is not moving. It's possibly the internet connection. Maybe I should switch off the video.
Oh.
It could be that. Sorry. Let me switch off the video and see if it's better. Because the internet is a problem here, can be problematic. Okay, so as I was saying, with higher education, with the current era of the global knowledge economy, universities are supposed to be sent to play a very crucial role in this economy, to give a country a competitive edge in the global and regional economy, because they are the places where people, at least traditionally, most research and development happens in universities. And also there are public benefits, with people becoming more productive and depending less on government support. When you listen to people as they cry out, government should support us, it's usually people that haven't gone to school compared to the ones that have had an opportunity for higher education. And as we all know, as most of us who have done research in higher education know, there is the three-pronged role of universities: to teach, to do research, and community services. And with the globalized world, knowledge has become a very, very important commodity. And nations like Uganda, which are still developing, we need new knowledge to compete in the global economy. And many societies are moving away from just production of material things to knowledge production. And so it becomes very important that the sources or the production or the factories, as I sometimes would like to call universities, should be upping their game. And so the problem analysis is, I'm looking at this as that the fact that the increase in universities, as we've seen, we have 44 private universities and 13 public universities. There is the expectation that as we increase the numbers of universities, there would also be increase in numbers of university lecturers and university students. And this would be accompanied by an increase in research productivity. And I argue in this paper that the increase, unfortunately, of private universities has not been accompanied by increased research productivity and knowledge generation. And what do I mean by research productivity? For purposes of this presentation, we're talking about the number of journal articles that are published in peer-reviewed journals. We're talking about the number of book chapters published, research conference papers presented, graduate students supervised to completion. But for the purposes of this presentation, I'm only going to be looking at the first two. And the objectives are I'm basing this presentation on a survey and more research that has been done, whose objective was to establish the extent of university lecturers' involvement in research and its dissemination, and their experiences in terms of support and research and the challenges that they face. And it is the methodology used, this presentation is drawn from data that was collected from an exploratory study that used a mixed method approach. I did a survey that was both descriptive and explanatory, and also literature review that has been done before and after the survey. The survey was conducted in 6 private universities that were chartered at that point. Right now there are 13, but at that point there were 6 that were chartered. And all teaching staff participated were at lecturer level and upward. In Uganda, the ranks in universities, you have assistant lecturers, you have a lecturer, you have a senior lecturer, associate professor, and professor as the highest rank. And in the survey, we had 235 participants that were in that survey, and 65% of them were male. 21% of them had both academic and administrative positions, and most of them were aged between 20 and 39 years old, and most of them were master's holders. 79% of them were master's holders, and only 12% had doctoral degrees. This gives you an idea of what is happening in private universities as far as the qualifications of people that work there. And so what were the results of this? Showed that most had participated in research, but while many of them had done some research, most of them had done it as part of adding to their qualifications. So people that had bachelors were going to do master's level, and at that point they would do research as part of their qualification. Those who had masters were going on to get a PhD, and they would do that as their dissertation, for their dissertation. And when analyzed, we did an analysis of variance to see, does it matter whether somebody is young or old, whether somebody has a lower degree or higher degree, or like bachelor's or master's or PhD? Does it matter whether somebody has an administrative responsibility, whether they'll participate in research, whether they are productive in the area of research, whether they have journal articles published, whether they have book chapters? And it showed that it didn't matter the age. It doesn't matter what academic level, whether somebody has a PhD or a master's, or it doesn't matter whether somebody has an administrative job. But when we looked at gender, the results showed that men were more likely than women to participate in research activities, and the women were less likely to be involved in research activities. And as I said, looking at the research productivity, we're looking at publications in peer-reviewed journals, journal articles that were published in peer-reviewed journals. And it showed that only 20%, while there were more than 80% had participated in research, in collecting data of some sort, only 20% of them had been able to engage in publication in peer-reviewed journals and in books. And the rest had mostly done their research, published their dissertations, and that was it. 17% had also published in books and book chapters from the research that was conducted. And so over 80% of the research that is being done in private universities that was being done was not then going on into becoming going out to be disseminated at conferences or as book chapters or as journal articles. And we asked about what were some of the things that they felt had happened, and most of them had this saying that most of their research had been funded by themselves. So even those who go for higher qualifications, they fund their own research. Those that got funding were only 36% that got donations, and only 24% had benefited from universities. And this correlated with the research that we again, the literature that we looked at, which shows that most of the universities, even those that have established research offices, research coordinators, deans of research, they don't provide much funding as far as research is concerned. And there was also this sense that most of the participants did not get any encouragement from their institutions to undertake research. And so most of it is individual initiative that happened. And so the two major factors that constrain lecturers' participation in research included having too many teaching tasks. Especially in private universities, there is that where you're expected to teach a certain number of courses per semester, which if you don't fulfill, then you're forced to keep teaching all through the year. And so no time to do research. But also there's lack of funding for research. And so most of them, as I said before, had to use their own pockets, had to touch their own pockets to fund their own research. So we ranked these in order of influence, and these consistently ranked high among all the lecturers in the 6 universities. But there were also these minor challenges that came up, some of them being having too many supervisory tasks, some of them being having no time, and then not having sufficient research facilities. And then many of them saying they didn't have mentorship from those that have the skills and are able to do research. So they felt like they were not getting mentored in their universities. And so the preliminary results from the survey of the literature, in 2022, the National Council for Higher Education actually produced a journal that was looking at universities and research and all that. And in one of them, Nakijuba and Ayodeji they did a similar study, and they found that that they did in the 2 of the universities were also in the original study, and also one of the other such as Kanabi and Owino, who did theirs in a public university, the same issues were coming up. They indicate that there is very low research productivity. Very few people go ahead to publish in peer-reviewed journals, if any. Very few book chapters are being produced. Not much has changed since the survey. And so what are the implications for policy? There is the good thing, at least the good news is that the many Ugandan universities, there is research being done. And most at master's level, students are producing dissertations. At PhD level, students are producing dissertations. And people are getting involved as research assistants in big collaborative studies. But most of it seems to stop there. And very few publications come out of this research that is undertaken by the many lecturers in private universities because they face challenges, including limited time, including limited funding, including lack of mentorship in those universities. And many of those interviewed said that they had taken part in research, some of them individual, but most of it didn't get published. And so while there's been pervasive university education and private financing in Uganda, and there is a big growing number of universities with the private sector growing bigger and bigger every year, these results show that there is very little in that area of research that is being done by the lecturers in the private universities. There is little productivity. There are book chapters not published, very little innovation, and only a very small number turns their research. There is research being done, but very little go on to become published. And there are many reasons for this. Including lack of funding and support, including lack of time and heavy teaching loads and supervisory loads, which pose major challenges. And my conclusion and my argument is that we are faced as a nation with many challenges. We have challenges including conflict in some parts. We have climate change. We have issues of poverty all over the place. We have land wrangles, and we can do with the research that can inform policy, but we also need to get involved in the knowledge economy for us to take advantage of what is happening. And the proliferation of so many universities and so many a large number of people that claim the name of research would put us in a good place for being able to be innovative, to do research, to generate knowledge. But we are not harnessing this advantage for some reason, for some of the reasons that have been highlighted before. Thank you very much for listening to me, and God bless you.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Now, like I indicated, at the beginning, that we're going to have a discussant, Dr. Edward Mboyonga. And now I'm just going to hand over to Dr. Edward Mboyonga to give his reflections and comments about the presentation. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Prof, for the amazing presentation and the opportunity that was given to me just to go through your paper. I must say that indeed I enjoyed reading your paper. Now it resonated with my own research interest on private higher education in Zambia. So as you were doing the introduction, in some way it sounded like partly it's my dissertation in the Ugandan context, of course. And so your research indeed makes a good contribution to this body of knowledge, considering that the private higher education sector in Africa is very much under-researched. I noted certain commonalities between Uganda and Zambia. In terms of the number of private higher education institutions, I think in both countries, the private sector outnumbers the public sector. For instance, in Uganda, you mentioned that there are 44 private universities compared to 13 public universities. I think in the Zambian case, it is also true, where we have 53 private universities and 9 public universities. And of course, when it comes to research productivities, the same concerns. Your draft paper, which I believe it is still very much. I think I was thinking when you introduced the paper, of course, you gave the ratio for the number of private universities versus public universities. I think it would have also been important to highlight the student enrollment ratios. So that would help contextualize the paper. So when it comes to the population sample, I noticed, of course, you had 6 private universities. Now, my question is, how are these private universities classified? So what I did then, I tried to Google some of these, and I noted that 4 of them, they are faith-based ones. That is Bugeme, Matthias Christian University, and the other one which is run by the Anglican Church. While the other 2, they are non-faith-based universities. So my question is that, are there any differences in terms of research funding and productivity between the faith-based universities, such as Uganda Christian Universities or Uganda Matthias Universities, and the non-faith-based universities like Kampala International Universities? So based on your findings, are there any differences in terms of research funding and productivity between different sectors of the private higher education? And then the other comment which I had is based on the results, especially on the aspect of gender. Yes, you clearly highlighted that males, they are more productive compared to female researchers, and that you sample at 35% of the females. But I thought the manner in which the paper was presented, I think we robbed the female of their voices. In the introduction, you stated that you wanted to highlight the experiences. So I thought in as much as the results showed that men were more likely than women to participate in research activities, I think it would have been interesting in your paper to go a step further by asking probably any reasons for that. And you providing that information, I think it would help highlight the gendered nature of research productivity, not just in Uganda, but also sub-Saharan African region. So maybe going forward, you might need to attend to that. And then there was an interesting finding which contrasts with most of the argument in the literature. In your presentation and the paper, you stated that it doesn't matter whether one has an administrative job when it comes to research productivity. But then at the same time, it was highlighted that one of the challenges is that there is this teaching overload where some lecturers have a lot of classes. And yet when it came to administrative matters, this didn't matter in terms of their research productivity. So I just wanted to find out why and what could be the reason, because one of the reasons I think most people give is that when they have a lot of administrative roles, then this affects their research productivity. But in your case, you say this doesn't matter. So your comment on this one would be very much appreciated. And then the other comment would be on the research support. Of course, in the paper, as well as your presentation, you highlighted clearly the fact that public universities, they don't receive donor funding, they don't receive government funding. And in your presentation, you highlighted that it was reported that about 6% at least reported donor funding or donor support. I think I would be more interested to find out then who are these donors who are funding this type of research in private universities. Yes, I know that 6% is not a big figure, but just the information on who are these donors, I think would provide certain information regarding what is happening in terms of research productivity in these universities. And related to this, I also had the question of what type of other external partners in Uganda. In mind, I have the World Bank funded African Center of Excellence in Agroecology and Livelihood, which is one of the centers of excellence in East Africa. And this is housed at Uganda Matias University, which is a private university. And for me, this points to evidence of some funding and research collaboration. But of course, it would be interesting to get your views on this one. Quickly, the other comment, which of course I had, is on the aspect of conceptualization of research productivity. I know in the beginning you talked of public sector reforms, but then in some sections of the paper, we also highlighted the fact that knowledge, of course, research knowledge is advanced as a commodity. So I was thinking then, how are you conceptualizing research knowledge in your paper? Is it that research is a commodity, or are you advancing research as a public good? So I think a clear conceptual framework will enrich the analysis of this paper. The other question, of course, before I talk of the last one, the other one is, of course, on the research capacity. I'm interested to knowing that knowing the fact that are there any other research forums within the universities apart from PhD and master's research? For instance, do these universities have journals in their universities? And if so, what is the implication insofar as research productivities in these universities? Then the last comment is just your own reflection on the data collection experience. I would be interested, to find out how it was with you in terms of data collection. Now, this is based on some of the observations that have been raised by the gurus of private higher education research in Africa, like Tamara, to observe that one of the challenges in terms of research in private higher education in Africa is that most of the private universities, they conceal, they underreport or exaggerate data about their operations, and this impedes the research process itself. So how did you experience the process of data collection? I think I'll end there. Thank you very much once again for the opportunity that was granted to engage with your paper. I enjoyed reading your paper. I enjoyed listening to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Edward, for more detailed discussion. Now we're going to give hand over to Professor Bacwayo to comment and respond to some of the questions that we raised. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate those comments and questions. Thank you for that. I I didn't. I think I will just follow according to your questions. I think you talked about the ratio of student enrollment to for contextualization. That one I actually didn't do that, and maybe thank you for bringing that up. That's one of the things that maybe I can look at. I mostly was focusing on the lecturers. My focus was on what is happening with the lecturers. Excuse me. And then you were talking about the 6 private universities and how they were classified. As I said, this is this data is not it's not for the current, because currently there are 13 private universities, 13 private universities that are chartered. So they've now it's 7 more that have been chartered since then. Those that are chartered are the ones that have all the benchmarks as far as the accreditation body is concerned, that they have all that is needed for a university. In Uganda, we have levels. There are those that are called projects. Then they go on to become licensed. Then they go on to become chartered. So most of the 40 something universities now, that I think when you deduct 13, are licensed to operate, but they are not chartered, which means that there are some things that are still missing. And so the National Council doesn't feel that they have all that is needed to operate as universities. Although if from an ordinary person, for an ordinary person who is not involved in university education, they don't know the difference. So students go to any. They don't realize that there is a difference between those that are chartered and those that are licensed. So long as something says this is a university, they go. And so long as the National Council has not come and revoked the license. They've actually revoked licenses of quite a number of universities here, which when they were given the license, you're usually given a certain period of time in which you're supposed to put in place all the other things that are still missing, so that you can get a charter. But many of them fail to get to that. I sometimes see I hope that you can still hear me, because I sometimes see the image goes slow. And then you ask me that you were surprised about the gender aspect, that I didn't give the female their voices. I think that's a valid comment. I think at that point, the analysis was looking at those other. I looked at age, looked at qualification, gender, and all that. I didn't go with any expectation of whether I'll find that there are more women or there are. My expectation was, my question was, are there any differences whether somebody's young or old? It's just that the gender one, when it came to the analysis, the significance of the differences is the gender that came out. It wasn't something that I intentionally went to look for, but it's the one that actually came out while all the others didn't show. There were differences, but they were not significant. It was only the gender one. And so I didn't ask that question to get the answers that you're talking about, but that's also giving me an idea of where I could go next. Then admin and non-admin, the contradiction. I suspect from my experience that in most universities, in the private universities also, the administrative staff have less teaching load because they have those additional responsibilities as administrators. But the difference was not that they were doing more than the others. So it's just that they were not doing less, they were not doing more. One of the things that, even when I was looking at the literature later, the thing that comes out is that some people have been traumatized by research during their studies, that when they finish the PhD or when they finish the masters, they don't want to they don't want to hear about anybody telling them to go and do more research. I don't know whether that's the explanation. It's one of the things that I saw as I was reading that that jumped out to me, because there are some people that will be excited if they get involved in a research project as research assistants, but when you get to the level of writing and publishing, many of them grow cold. I don't know your experience, but that has been my experience. They are very happy to go to the field, collect data, and do that. But when it comes to the now turning that into a publication, many of them are unwilling to get involved. So it could be that even the non-admin staff are not really that interested in doing more, especially if they're not being forced by the publish or perish. Because I think most of the universities, most of the private universities are new. And so the concept of publish or perish had not become very big, although now it is becoming big. And so now people are realizing, oh, I need to publish, otherwise I'll lose my job. But I think in those places where that doesn't exist, many of them will say, I'm done, I've done my PhD, I've collected my data. And these days also, most of the PhDs require PhD students to publish. So that also has helped to increase the publication. Which donors fund the private universities? I think you talked about one of them, World Bank, as you said, like Uganda Matters University has that center of excellence, but we've also had places like Norway, the NORAD, they opened it up to private universities, but the large majority of funding, like in Uganda, when you look at Makerere University, they have funding from Carnegie, they have funding from CEDA, they have funding from the German DAD. So most of the funding tends to go to public universities, but the donors have also now started to open up a little bit. And so I think with those that got donor funding, what I suspect is that some of these were doing maybe their masters or their PhDs, and so they got a scholarship to fund their research. Experience, knowledge. Okay, my conceptualization of am I saying that knowledge is a commodity or a public good? I think I'm on the side of the knowledge being a public good, much as I talked about knowledge being a commodity, but the reality is that it is seen as a commodity, but knowledge should be available to be used by others. But of course, because it's scarce, it sort of also becomes a commodity. The person who has it will try to hold it and not share with others, and maybe only share if they get a benefit out of it. And then the research journal, whether we have the research forums and journals in most of the universities at the time when I did the research, most of them didn't have journals. Some of them are struggling journals, but most of them, okay, I think maybe one of the, what I needed to talk about was maybe internationally recognized peer reviewed journals. There's also that concept of because one of the things why I'm still doing the preliminary analysis of literature, you'll find that people do research, publish within Uganda, but if you go online to look for that data, you won't find it. And so I think that is where I was coming from. Some of the universities do have, but some of them are struggling. Even the journals that they have are struggling. Experience with the data collection. I see that time is running out, so I need to wind up. My experience was it was really, really difficult to get the data. I've actually been thinking I would like to do a follow-on study, but whenever I think about how difficult it was, I get a little bit cold feet. But the good thing was that this was mostly was with the lecturers themselves. If I was to get that data from the officials, and in fact, that was one of the limitations that I had, even getting a list of the full-time lecturers at the universities was a problem. I could not get the lists for any. So if even when you look at my sample, I could not say this university has this many. They couldn't give that to me. That's how difficult it is. But at least because it was with the lecturers themselves, that made it easier for me, that I was able to access the lecturers. But it did give me a disadvantage that I couldn't do a sampling frame and all that. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. Johanna, I've noted your hand, but this is what we're gonna do. We're just gonna give the audience, face-to-face audience, an opportunity to ask questions, give any comments, you know. Then after we give people who have connected online to give their comments and ask questions. Anyone? Any question? Okay. 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 You can go ahead. Okay.
Thanks, Prof, for the presentation. It's very interesting. Just two thoughts that come to my mind. And I wondered whether in the process of accreditation by the National Council, as an institution kind of moves through the process from project to charter to licensed, about the criteria for evaluation for institutions in meeting the needs to be accredited, and the role that research plays, and the role that staff qualification plays, with potential implications for whether the importance of research lies in improving the qualifications of staff for accreditation, or the research playing a role for the institution to be accredited. And then just another thought, I wondered whether there was any comparative data on research outputs from public institutions.
We also have the second question, I think.
All right, thank you very much, Prof, for the presentation. I had two questions, but I think you've already touched on the first one that talks about the notion of publish or perish. My second question is, I was thinking about the issue of funding of private universities, and my question was, the reason why there isn't much funding for the private universities, the fact that most of the universities, as you've said, right, in terms of the staff qualification, you have universities that have only 21% of staff having PhD, being PhD holders, and the rest of them masters, because most of these funding bodies look at the qualification and the experiences of the people that will be handling their funds. So would that be one of the factors why there is a lack of funding in the private universities? Thank you.
Okay, we also have a question from Dr. Pepe.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof, for the presentation. Very insightful. I think I just want to follow up on Tiffany's question. I'm interested in hearing more of Prof's reflections or kind of practical recommendations when in relation to funding. What can these universities do, with whom? Is it possible? Is it feasible? So what's the way forward if funding is the key issue? And I think a general question around what are the implications when licenses are revoked on students and lecturers at that specific university?
Okay. Do we still have any other question? Okay, Prof, I think we're going to give you an opportunity to respond to the questions that were raised. Then thereafter, we'll give people who have actually joined us online to also ask any questions. You can go ahead, Prof.
Thank you. I hope I had the first question right about the process of National Council accreditation, what the role of research plays on that. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the accreditation process, like I said, is a gradual process, and then the things that they require would be that you'd have people that have the capacity to do research, of course. So they look at the number of staff that you submit, their academic qualification and all that. And those that don't have sufficient numbers of staff do not get the charter. But I think the threshold is so low that it still allows universities that don't have the numbers that are needed to still get chartered. But also, I think some universities have like they would have on paper, they'd have people, but in reality, when you look at what they have, it's actually different from what they have on paper. Yes, the accreditation council does come and look at people to look at the numbers that you have, but I don't think that they do the scrutiny to make sure that what you say on your paper is actually for some of the things, because it's a gradual thing. For some of the things they come and look, for some of them they may not. But I think that at the point of accreditation, the research productivity and research outputs are not, what they look at more is the research funding, what the institution puts in their budget for research, for supporting research, rather than looking at the research productivity of the staff. Comparative data on public institutions, that's one of the things that I want to look at, because for most, when you do a search, most of the writing has been about public sector, but the public universities. And of course, for us, Makerere University has been there now. They've been celebrating 100 years. So there's a lot that is written about them. And so specifically for this, I was looking at the private universities because there is very, very little that had been written about it. But I'm also now thinking of looking, because if you see in the slide on literature, one of the universities that I looked at was Chambogo, where they did a similar study, and that's a public university. And so I intend to delve further into that. Then the funding by private universities, is it because of qualifications and experiences? I don't think so. That the funding tends to be more on the basis of relationships and collaborations that have been going on for a very, very long time. So, for example, one of the things that I've been involved in, I went as a postdoctoral researcher to Norway. They have a program that they fund researchers to go, and they also fund researchers, but they specifically fund Makerere University. Somehow, two of us from private university got onto that because I guess because I had studied in Makerere, but there are some donors that are specific. They only want to give to public entities, and I think there is some agreement that was signed by government. And so, because if it were about that, the scholarship, like things to do with scholarships and all that, they usually fund. They tend to fund government. I guess those are some of the bilateral agreements that are there. But definitely, when it comes to grants and applying for grants, that does have a huge impact, because if you don't have sufficient numbers of people that have been involved in research applying for grants, then you're not likely to win a grant if most of you people don't have the experience. And then reflections and funding. One of the things that I had in an earlier paper that I was talking about was the need for the private universities to be recognized for their role in education, in research, in community engagement, because for a long time like I said, those bilateral organizations, they prefer to go to public universities. Yet private universities, they are actually, unlike the ones in the Western countries that have endowments, that have been there for a long time, that have donors, that are private, the ones in Uganda especially, they rely on student fees. And so they can't raise sufficient funds to do much, even those that want to support research. And so my argument has been that rather than specifically funding, for example, SIDA gives millions of dollars to Makerere for research, which they are also then supposed to help to support the other universities, the younger universities, but it always ends up public university and being used up at the public university level. So there's need to recognize the role that the private universities are playing in higher education, and to find ways of supporting them. They may not necessarily give funding for fees and whatever, but in terms of research, to maybe encourage those that get funding to get collaborators with private universities who can do research with them, so that they grow the capacity for both sides. I think there was a question about implications for when licenses are revoked. Sadly, it obviously affects the student, the former students of that institution, but it has happened because it protects the other students, that there would be students that would have applied to go into those kinds of institutions that lack basic things. Like I said, unfortunately for us, most of our parents have gone to university. Most of us are first generation people that have gone to university. People assume that anything that has a name university attached to it is providing quality education, which is not the case. And so it's understandable when the National Council decides to revoke a license, because it has to protect the public. Most of the people are not at all aware that there is a difference between one that is chartered, one that is licensed, and one that is just a project that just started the other day. And so, unfortunately, it's sad for those that are former students, but it is protecting the other generation of students that would have come to those universities. Thank you.
Okay, Prof. Well, just quickly taking into account that we are already against the clock, we just give a few individuals who have joined the online platform an opportunity to ask Prof some questions. Then thereafter we wrap up the session. I see Johanna, your hand has been up for a long time. I think we'll actually start with you. You can go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Kukunda, for the very good presentation. My question is on the fact that if you look at the sample of your research, you can see that the qualifications of the people who participated in this research, the academic qualifications, most of them have master's degree. So I think that it is very easy or very likely for professors to produce papers compared to these people. And therefore, I think that low research productivity here is also attributed to the qualifications, our academic qualification of these people. So I was thinking maybe if you are also interested in understanding the institutional support or internal support that are offered by these universities to help these academics to be able to produce papers. Otherwise, I think without a strong institutional support, considering the academic qualification, it would be very hard for them to produce papers. So, because again, your research is the mixed research, so you could have maybe a question which is a qualitative to ask the universities in terms of the available institutional or internal research support for this kind of academics.
Okay, just before you respond, Prof, we also have another question here.
Yeah.
Please be brief.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Prof.
There are also comments. Okay.
Okay. Mine is just an addition that when you are writing your final paper, maybe you should look on the criteria for promoting academic staff in terms of the weight they are getting. Like, for example, universities. Is it different from the public experience where they are putting much emphasis on research? They are putting more points, promotion points on research rather than teaching. What they experience in private universities in terms of the weight of the point they are getting for someone to be promoted to the next rank.
We have one last question. In the chat, please go through the chat.
Oh, sure. Yes, we have this one from. Oh, want to read that?
We can just read it.
Okay, from Samuel Fongwa. Is asking, should all universities or academics conduct research? Should we have accredited teaching universities? What is the discussion on the institutional differentiation in Uganda?
Yeah, I think that's the only question.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, Prof, you can just go ahead and respond to the 3 questions that we asked.
Thank you very much for those questions and your very useful comments. On the issue of the low research productivity, and because many were masters, excuse me. Sorry, I had an interruption. In regard to that, it's true that it could be because of the qualifications, the fact that most of those have not got doctorates. That's why they were not involved. But like we did that analysis to see whether there was a difference on research productivity, depending on whether somebody had a doctoral qualification or not, ones that had a higher rank, and there was no difference. Like I said, when I read later in the literature, that's when I realized that there is also that fatigue that some people get to, and they're like, I'm done with this, don't involve me in any more research. And so that could also be, but also of course they lack, then there's a lack of mentorship, because as most of these private universities, they are new, they don't have as many professors that can provide the sort of mentorship that encourages the younger ones to get involved in being productive and in publishing. But thank you very much for that suggestion, to ask a question about research support. That's one of the things that actually came up. There is, I think, it was one of the in my presentation that there is little research support, even at supervisor level, very little, at departmental level, not much, but also at university level, the funding is low because the universities don't have a lot of external support. And so they don't put a lot of emphasis on funding research. And then the question about the criteria for promoting academic staff, actually that's why I said I talked about publish or perish. When most of these private universities had started, they focused a lot on teaching. They had to get to a level where they would be recognized as having the capacity to teach. And so they didn't really require many of their staff to do research and publish, but that has changed lately. Many of their promotion, and even with that, actually even at that time, many of them, the promotions required people to have published, people to have done research. But even when that is the case, actually it's not only true in private universities, it's also true in some public universities. There are some people who say, this is it, I am done, I'm not interested in promotion. I hope, I don't know whether you've met such people, but I have seen such who this is a job, I'm doing it, and I'm not interested in a promotion. And so that doesn't become, unless the university then says if you don't get promoted after a while, then you lose your job. Then that is now when it becomes an incentive for some people. It's not for everybody, but for some. And then the question about whether we should have, what was the question? Whether we should have teaching staff, universities that are teaching universities rather than those that conduct research. I think that's a good question and a good thing to think about. I do understand that in some countries, there are some universities that are set up which are strictly for teaching, and then some are actually set up, they are known as research universities. But I don't think we have gotten to that level of differentiation. And so because we are operating in the same environment where people are expected to do research, this is a global economy. You're also competing with other universities where research is done, and people and students compare, and so it becomes difficult when you say, I'm just going to focus on teaching. And I don't think the accreditation institutions have gotten to that level of being able to differentiate. And so much as that is a valid a suggestion that some universities could go for, in our current environment, it may not be welcome for some, because they want to be able to compete with others, both locally and globally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. I think this will be the end of our talk. But before we allow you to leave, we just want to take this opportunity to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for availing yourself for this wonderful presentation. We indeed enjoyed your presentation. It was so informative and insightful. And we also want to thank our discussant, Dr. Edward, for a more comprehensive and detailed discussion, and everyone who actually participated in the presentation. Prof, we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Bye-bye.
Bye.